The river was freezing, its current swift and unforgiving. Jeremiah felt the icy water bite into his skin, pulling him under as it churned around him. For a few terrifying moments, he couldn't tell which way was up. His lungs burned as he kicked frantically, fighting to break the surface. When his head finally burst through the water, he gasped, sucking in deep breaths of the cold night air. The current was dragging him downstream, the roar of the water nearly deafening. His eyes darted around, searching for Sarah and Liam. "Sarah!" he shouted, his voice barely carrying over the rush of the river. A few yards ahead he saw them, Liam clutching a piece of driftwood, Sarah clinging to his side. Relief surged through him. They were alive, but they wouldn't be for long if they didn't get out of the river. Jeremiah kicked toward them, using the current to his advantage. He had no idea how far the creatures had followed, or if they even could, but he wasn't about to wait and find out. Every instinct screamed at him to get everyone to safety. The river curved sharply, and as they rounded the bend, Jeremiah spotted a cluster of boulders jutting out from the water. It was their best chance. "Head for the rocks!" he bellowed, kicking with everything he had left. Liam, pale and shaking, steered toward the nearest boulder, grabbing hold of it with his free hand. He helped Sarah up onto the slick surface, her face pale but determined as she scrambled out of the water. Jeremiah reached them seconds later, his arms burning from the effort. He hauled himself up, collapsing beside them as the river raged on below. For a few minutes they sat there, gasping for breath, the cold gnawing at their bones. The creatures' guttural growls were nowhere to be heard, but that didn't mean they were safe. "We have to keep moving," Jeremiah said finally, forcing himself to his feet despite the weight of exhaustion pressing down on him. "They'll be on us soon enough." Are they even human?" Sarah whispered, her voice trembling as she glanced back toward the dark forest. What were those things? Jeremiah didn't have an answer. He didn't want to tell his children what he feared, that those creatures weren't just animals gone wrong, that something far worse than bears stalked these woods. He had no idea what they were up against, but it was ancient and hungry, and it was coming for them. Liam pushed himself up, wincing as his injured arm throbbed. "We can't outrun them forever, Jeremiah." "I know," Jeremiah said grimly, "but we're not going to try and outrun them." "What do you mean?" Sarah asked, her eyes wide. "We're going to take the fight to them," he said, his voice steady but hard. "We need to end this. Whatever they are, whatever's cursed this land, we have to destroy it or we'll never be free." Liam frowned, his face pale. "You're talking about going back to the mountain, aren't you?" Jeremiah nodded. "That's where it all started. Those creatures came down from there. Something on that mountain has woken up, something evil. If we don't stop it now, it'll keep coming. It'll never stop." Sarah's face was ashen, but she nodded slowly. "We're with you, Papa. But how? How do we kill something like that?" Jeremiah's mind raced. The rifle hadn't done much more than slow the bear creatures down. Regular bullets weren't going to cut it. He needed something stronger, something that could break the curse. "The silver," he muttered to himself, thinking of the silver bullets tucked in his pack. "My father used to talk about creatures that couldn't be killed by normal means. He said silver was their weakness." "We have silver bullets, right?" Sarah asked, catching on. "A few," Jeremiah confirmed. "It's not much, but it's all we've got." Liam shook his head, staring at the dark forest looming on the other side of the river. "So we're heading back to the mountain with a handful of silver bullets to face God knows what." Jeremiah met his brother's gaze, his face set with grim determination. "Yes, and we'll use every last one if we have to." By the time the McKennas made it back to solid ground, dawn was beginning to creep over the horizon. The first light of day did little to ease the weight pressing down on them. The forest was still too quiet, too heavy with the unseen menace lurking within. Jeremiah led the way, keeping his eyes and ears alert for any sign of the creatures. His rifle was slung across his back, and though he had a box of silver bullets, he knew they might be the only thing standing between them and whatever horror waited on that mountain. Liam and Sarah followed close behind, their own rifles at the ready. The river had put some distance between them and the creatures, but Jeremiah knew it wouldn't be long before they caught up. If they were lucky, they'd reach the mountain's base before nightfall. The path through the forest was treacherous, overgrown with brambles and thick roots that threatened to trip them at every step. The deeper they ventured, the more oppressive the atmosphere became. It was as if the very land was trying to warn them away. Finally, as the sun hung low in the sky, they reached the base of the mountain. A steep, rocky incline stretched before them, the jagged peaks disappearing into the mist. Jeremiah stared up at the towering cliffs, his stomach knotting with dread. "This is it," he said, his voice barely more than a whisper. Sarah stepped forward, her face pale but resolute. "What do we do now?" Jeremiah took a deep breath, steeling himself for what was to come. "We climb, we find whatever's up there, and we finish this." The climb was brutal. The jagged rocks cut into their hands and the cold wind bit at their faces, but the McKennas pressed on. Every step felt like a battle against the mountain itself, but Jeremiah refused to stop. He couldn't stop. Not now. Hours passed, and the sun dipped below the horizon, plunging the world into darkness once more. The only light came from the moon, casting an eerie glow over the cliffs. But as they climbed higher, a new sound reached Jeremiah's ears, a low, rhythmic chanting carried on the wind. He froze, motioning for Sarah and Liam to stop. They listened, and soon enough, they heard it too. "What is that?" Sarah whispered, her eyes wide with fear. Jeremiah's heart raced. The sound was coming from the summit, a deep, unnatural chant that seemed to reverberate through the very stones beneath their feet. It wasn't human, it was something far older, something that had been waiting for this moment. "We're close," he muttered, gripping his rifle tighter. "Come on." They continued their ascent, the chanting growing louder with each step. As they neared the summit, the mist thickened, swirling around them like ghostly fingers. And then, finally, they reached the top. Jeremiah stopped in his tracks, his breath catching in his throat. There, standing in the center of the summit, was a massive stone altar, ancient and weathered by time. Around it, the bear-like creatures stood in a circle, their twisted forms illuminated by the pale moonlight. At the altar's center, something writhed. Something massive and dark, coiled in shadow. It was alive, and it was waiting. "This is it," Jeremiah whispered, his voice barely audible. "This is where it all started." He loaded the silver bullets into his rifle, his hands steady despite the terror threatening to consume him. "We end it here." The creatures turned toward them, their glowing eyes locking onto the intruders. And then, with a bone-chilling roar, they charged. The battle had begun, but this time, the McKennas weren't running. They stood their ground, silver bullets in their rifles, and resolve in their hearts. The creatures were fast, relentless, but Jeremiah had a plan. He wasn't here to simply survive. He was here to kill whatever cursed their land. As the first creature lunged toward him, Jeremiah took aim and fired, the silver bullet piercing the beast's chest. It howled in pain, collapsing to the ground as its twisted form withered and died. But there were more, so many more. "Liam, Sarah, stay close!" Jeremiah shouted as he fired again, taking down another beast. The air was filled with the deafening sound of gunfire and the roars of the creatures, but the McKennas held their ground. And then, from the altar, the shadow stirred. The massive, coiled form began to unravel, rising from the stone with an eerie, unnatural grace. Jeremiah's breath caught in his throat as he realized what it was, a creature born of ancient darkness. A thing of nightmares. Its body was serpentine, its eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. This was the source of the curse, the heart of the evil that had plagued their land for generations, and it was coming for them. Jeremiah raised his rifle, but he knew the silver bullets wouldn't be enough to stop this. Not alone. "Sarah, the altar!" he shouted. "We have to destroy it!" Sarah's eyes widened in realization. The altar was the key. It was. Be sure to hit subscribe and hit the bell so you do not miss the next and final chapter of this story.